Hi, it's Dave. Welcome. Today, I am doing an episode on Tesla's fleet advantage. So I'm in the middle of a multi-part, like kind of marathon session with James Douma here, going through Andrej Karpathy's recent talk on full self-driving progress. But this is episode number 4. I'm taking a little bit of a detour, and I want to kind of chat with James here about the fleet. And we just finished a whole episode on Tesla's kind of data collection process, how they've collected in their most recent kind of run 1 million 10-second video clips, 8 camera views plus other info, labeled them with 6 billion. There's 6 billion different object labels there, including depth and velocity. But I guess my big question is, it seems like Tesla's really prioritizing like, hey, this data set is not just large, but it has to be diverse. It has to be a wide range of different scenarios, a lot of edge cases to bring value. And I'm thinking about that more. I'm like, this stuff is like so dependent on the size of the fleet, right? Plus, each car in the fleet needs to be equipped with the right hardware and software to run the neural nets in shadow mode to get the right type of data. So it's not just any car, right? You can't just put on a video recording or video recorder on any car to get data. You need to put on like actually the full self-driving computer in each car running the neural nets to process the triggers, which data video clips to capture and to send them back to the mothership, et cetera. But it seems like this is extremely this is a very daunting and ambitious project, especially like if you're an OEM and you don't have any, cars on the road that is equipped to collect this data, with full self-driving computers, all this stuff. Like, how do you even get started? It's like, it seems like a daunting challenge. And it just seems like in some ways Tesla is, I want to say light years, but it just doesn't seem like there's much of a, competition in terms of the
what are the prospects that Ford is going to like put $3,000 of hardware into every car and pay for it out of their own pocket?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and the other idea is like, it seems like it's a big difference if you have 1 million car fleet versus 100,000.
But you have to start somewhere.
Fleet, right?
The only reasonable way, you can't do it with 1,000 cars. Mm-hmm. You just can't, right? It's big numbers. It's numbers that are big enough that if your approach is you're going to own the whole fleet yourself, it's very problematic, right? I mean, because you might have to run this fleet. I mean, Tesla's been running this fleet for years, right? And they haven't had millions of cars, but they've had hundreds of thousands of cars for years now. So, if you had to buy and operate 100,000 cars for years, right? That's economically, that's really hard place to get to with a business model that is different from what maybe there are business models, right? I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a business model that's different from the way Tesla did, which is basically sell consumers a product that they want anyway, mm-hmm. and put this on there and tell them it's giving them something and actually give them something for it, provide mm-hmm. some kind of value as a rationalization for them to like have it and use it. And a side benefit for you as a corporation is the ability to gather in large amounts of very, very specific data that you need for training. Maybe there's a different business model. It's hard to. I've had a hard time imagining. I've always thought that like if somebody was going to try to close the gap with Tesla on the approach that Tesla is using, that it's going to be an auto OEM that is making cars anyway, right? And they'll do what Tesla did, which is we'll put a lot of hardware on the cars, we'll try to find a way to pay for it, and then we'll run that fleet for years until we gather enough data to get our network working the way that we want it to. Of course, the bar for succeeding comes down and down and down. I mean, the more computers you have, and the more powerful the computers in the car are, and the better the neural networking techniques you have to work with are, the fewer cars you need and the less data you need. I mean, that number is going to decline over time as technique improves.
Well, okay. On that point, though, I would like make a counterpoint. Maybe just like if you take a different approach, well, let's say you evaluate full self-driving not on just kind of comparing it to human driving, but if you evaluate full self-driving compared to the leader in the full self-driving field, meaning because a lot of times it's like I think people compare, okay, what's the bar? You know, if it's just human driving, then I would say, yeah, it gets easier and easier with more compute power, with more advances with neural nets and all this other stuff. But if the bar is actually not human driving, but if the bar is like the leader in the field who's the safest, then it seems like it's always a moving target where maybe it's not going to get easier for people. You know, it'll be easier to get to that minimum bar of just safer than a human. But over time, I wonder if that really means anything. If the leader is 100 times or 1,000 times or 10,000 times safer than a human, you could pass the human bar, but it's like it's not usable. You just can't drive it because it's just not safe.
Yeah, I mean, there are various sort of flywheel effects or network effects and that come to play here, and the not being able, like if a criteria for being able to do it at all is that you have to get close to the leader or at least be in the same, and you start way behind, well, yeah, that's a pretty difficult. But there's so many network effects at work here. Yeah. You know, getting to scale it. You know, if you have the car everybody wants to buy, right? Or if then that continues to increase the size of your fleet and increase your power and ability to get better, faster and faster and faster. I mean, it doesn't seem like, not only does that gap, I mean, the gap only continues to grow, right? There isn't a scenario under which anybody can close that gap. They can get out there and they can make progress, but you have to be moving faster than your competitor if you're going to close the gap to them. And all of the forces right now seem to suggest that that Tesla's kind of there at escape velocity, right? Yeah. Like you can start now and you can get better, but you can't. Not only can you not catch up to them, you cannot close the gap, right? The gap will always be growing.
Yeah, I mean, so a few days ago, I was chatting with a friend who's like a long time software developer, et cetera. And then we were talking about Tesla, and he was kind of pointing out this importance of Tesla owning the full stack, like all the way from vehicles to hardware to the chips to, the data collection, the data itself, the neural nets, the training computer, everything, right? The whole experience. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, I wonder like how difficult it is to do what Tesla's doing, like put this $3,000 piece of, software or hardware, right, into the car and incrementally add value, but use all that data to, add more value and because you need the whole stack, some access to the whole stack to add that type of value incrementally over time toward autonomous driving. I'm thinking like by Tesla owning everything, it was a simple Elon Musk decision, we're doing it, yes. And all the cars get the hardware, the $3,000, no matter if the margins like tank for each car, it doesn't matter, like they know exactly where they're headed. And it just is a simple unified process, right? Because they own the whole stack. But if you are a company where you're reliant on any third parties in that whole stack of technology, where you don't own the whole process, it just seems like it would add such an immense amount of complexity to the decision-making process where it's not straightforward.
Well, so there's the Mobileye example that you can talk about. I mean, we don't, what happened behind the scenes between Mobileye and Tesla is not completely understood. But it seems that one of the breaking points between the two was when Mobileye insisted on having access to all this stuff that Tesla is doing, right, with their own system. And my understanding is Mobileye's relationship with OEMs that they sell systems to is that Mobileye, part of the contract is Mobileye gets data from all those systems. Like any data the OEM gets, Mobileye takes that, right? So if you're an OEM, so Tesla at some point they were like, we don't need your chip, we'll make our own, right? Like we're not going to agree to those terms. We're not going to buy your chip. We're going to develop our own. Like I don't know for sure that that's what happens, but that's one story I've heard about what was going on. So Mobileye cranked up the requirements in terms of data sharing and whatnot, and Tesla said no, right? And that they were going to go their own way. If you're Ford and you're buying a system from Mobileye and they're going to get all the data, right? Then you're pretty much signing up for, Mobileye is always going to own the stack on this kind of stuff, and you're not going to get a cut of that. And that, Mobileye is not paying the $3,000 to put the electronics in each one of the car. You are, but they're getting the benefit. And that seems like a really big problem. Like you were talking about multiple organizations. Well, here you've got a situation where the costs and the benefits are in two different organizations. The OEM is bearing the cost and Mobileye is getting the benefit, right? Who's going to sign up for that? Well, nobody is going to sign up for that, right? And so Mobileye doesn't get what they want and Ford doesn't get what they want, right? Because the distribution of costs and benefits isn't. And if you're all in the same organization, right? If Tesla's doing both ends of that kind of stuff, then the decision is much easier. Yeah. I mean, it's a hard decision anyway. When I learned that they were going to put FSD computers and 7 cameras in all these cars, I was like, that was like one of the most gutsy sort of business engineering decisions I think I've ever seen. Right? Like we're going to front that because this is in 2016, right? Obviously, it's been a long road, and obviously, they had hopes that they were going to get there quicker. Well,
it seems like
it's a huge amount of money to invest for a hugely long period of time, right? To get to this capability. And it might not work, it's the farther back. I mean, they made the decision in 2014, right? Or 2015. They didn't act. I mean, they were rolling the cars out in 2016. So, they made the decision in 2014. ImageNet was at the end of 2012. It was 2013, right? So Elon sometime in 2014 is looking at the ImageNet results from like 18 months ago and saying, yeah, I think that's going to rule the world. I think we're going to bet the company on that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
That's amazing.
I know it's amazing because, if you stick, let's say $3,000 worth of hardware into a car and majority of people don't even buy the option, that's a huge margin cut. That's like, think about it. I mean, if you're running razor thin margins and the life and death of your company is at stake, and
I mean, ICE companies, they, like in a sense, in their normal course of business, they can't do it. They have to get additional funding outside, and that funding would have to come in with the expectation that they were going to be able to significantly expand their margins or their market share or something like that in order to compensate. Or you could have, the German government decide VW is not going to lose this fight, right? And the government steps in, or, China picks a national champion or something like that. Seems like a feasible way that these things that Tesla could get real competition, right? And in those but in the normal kind of commercial course of operations where, ICE car companies, they're already burdened with, the need to convert to electrics and this giant boat anchor of an ICE business that they have to somehow unwind, and all of the relationships and encumbrances that are entailed therein, right?
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
hard.
I mean, it seems like if you're Waymo or, some type of company that you can own all your cars and the whole stack, then it's easier to make that decision to have all your cars equipped with certain, hardware. But the problem,
if Waymo decides to start making cars,
and that's the thing. The problem with Waymo is they're limited to just like, these really expensive cars that they're not a consumer car company. And it seems like there's this, hesitance on like entering the consumer car market, like from folks like, let's say Google, Waymo, or Apple, or others, because it's super complex. And to this point, there hasn't been very much margin in the car business. It's just not a very attractive business. It's just lots of headache. Who wants to spend?
You're going to die. Right?
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
Try to do it at this point, because there was an opportunity and Tesla took it.
Exactly,
and there's no other behind a Tesla opportunity. Right. Because they're just going to win that space.
Because at this point, like you go into this market of extreme complexity, setting a factory, like complex supply chain. and you have all this liability for each car you make,
and you
for
don't have
endless
Elon
liability.
Musk to like,
Yeah.
do it for you. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
On
And
top
then
of that, yeah.
and then
No,
you
I think this is what makes Apple such a compellingly interesting candidate for this space, right? Because they definitely have a mix of you could imagine Apple deciding to get into the car business, right? I'm not saying they will or it's likely, but you could imagine it. It's not completely unreasonable. I mean, they've gone into really big, complicated, expensive businesses that took many, many years of investment, right? They've got a powerful brand. They've got, God's own bank account. They've got the resources. Like if they really decided it was something that they wanted to do, they were going to stick with it, like they could become number two, right? They could have a shot at that. But it's really hard to see the path when you toss FSD or just like we were talking earlier about, having these, incredibly smart cars that just make sure you're going to be okay. You get in the car, you go to the store, and you don't have, you don't have to worry about making a stupid mistake where somebody gets hurt or whatever, because the car is just going to protect you from that kind of stuff. Like if that becomes the thing that we have in the world, that's not a thing that anybody else gets easily without cutting a license deal with Tesla. and maybe that's what happens. Tesla could end up I wouldn't be surprised given the pro-consumer attitudes that at least the company has espoused, and which generally it seems like they've demonstrated fealty to, that they would license it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree. It seems like the bar is so high now that Tesla's in the game. Like in 2016, 17, like maybe there was a more open field, but now it's like Apple or Google tries to buy or make a car company. It's like you have to be better than Tesla, or else no one's going to buy your product. It's ruthless out there, and you just don't have that that same opportunity as there was maybe 5 years ago.
Apple does have an ecosystem that they could package, right? And other OEMs have loyal customer bases, right, for various reasons that are advantages to them. I mean, it's not like nobody else has cards that they can play. But the entire mix seems hard to compete with.
Yeah, it seems like China, is, I wouldn't say an exception, but you have different car companies like XPeng and NIO that are supported
150 apparently.
150. Are supported by different parts or entities of the government, and it seems like they might have more of the guts and the vision to say, hey, we're gonna add something like a full self-driving computer to every car, collect the data, and do what Tesla's done. It's just that right now it seems like the Chinese companies they're all espousing LiDAR as part of the solution. So that kind of gives me some hesitancy on, I mean, maybe they'll pivot, but I don't know. It just seems like it's an immensely more difficult challenge if you're trying to, include LiDAR into the solution. You're kind of like dependent on that. And
if you're including LiDAR and you're not doing what, Waymo is doing with it, because it's important to understand that what Waymo uses LiDAR for is not, it's not the same as just putting LiDAR on your consumer car because it's a better radar, right? Those are two very different use cases. The Waymo uses LiDAR and high def maps because their approach to self-driving is qualitatively different than what Tesla is doing. So like, if Didi tries to do what Tesla is doing, and they think that putting LiDARs on the car is going to make it easier for them to do that, they may have a very rude awakening.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like Waymo's approach is so limited though in its application, versus like if you're a consumer
There's the Cruise approach, right? Like Cruise is kind of a hybrid where they say, well, we're not going to work everywhere. We're going to work some places and we're going to do high def maps for those.
I mean, that's
Cruise isn't using LiDAR for localization though. Right?
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, how useful is it when, most places you go, it's hard to really, turn on the feature.
It has a use case, I think. I think in a world where, you can buy a Tesla instead and you can get all those use cases and other ones. And, there will be people who will buy it. And I thought for a long time when autopilot finally got to a point where it could do my highway driving and I could mostly relax, even though I had to keep an eye on it. I felt kind of at that point that I was probably already getting 90% of all the utility I was going to get from it. Because, it would be great if it could drive me to the grocery store and stuff, but I don't have kids and, and I can take Uber to the airport. Like a lot of the robo-taxi advantages above what I have with highway autopilot right now, they're nice. And I'm definitely going to look forward to getting them. I'm certainly going to pony up for it. But in terms of my own personal quality of life, just having the car make my highway drive relaxing is such a huge chunk of the total value proposition. And maybe you get that with Cruise. Maybe if GM can do that on most of the, interstate freeways and major highways, they might cover most of the benefit for most of the people and have a compelling product, even if it's not autopilot.
Okay, so I want to have I'll do a different angle on that idea. Is I would say, you're getting this relaxation / you're not as attentive on the road, but you still have to supervise it, right? Whether it's Cruise or autopilot, whatever. And I get that that's great. People love it, but I think there's a whole nother step up, which is unsupervised. Like you can actually fall asleep in a car or just completely write emails or play a game, etc. That to me seems like a whole nother level of utility and value that, let's say, autonomous driving can bring. And once you get to that level, I think the big factor will be on the ultimate safety stats, like how safe. And it just seems like the leader of safety with autonomous driving in that field, if it's truly you have a big lead in safety, it's a noticeable big lead. It just seems like that's like a no-brainer. Like every other thing, it would just be like, I wouldn't feel safe. I wouldn't feel safe in an autonomous driving vehicle that I'm falling asleep with. If there's another brand,
motorcycles. Yeah.
Well, that's true. But if there's another brand that's significantly safer, like sure there might be some people who opt to choose a less safe, but to me it's just a no-brainer.
As the father of 2 young children, I think your idea is probably your perspective is consistent with your cohort, right? But a lot of people feel differently.
Yeah, I think there's diversity, but it just seems to me, I don't know. That's my personal opinion. Is people when it comes down to death, life and death, when the car is doing all the driving, if there is like 2 or 3 brands that are similar, that's one thing. But if there's one brand that's just significantly more safer, it just seems like that's the only brand. I'm sure there'll be marginal audiences, marginal people who choose less safe things for different reasons, like a motorcycle, for example. But overall, it just seems like the masses will choose, the far more safer, vehicle.
I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of people who feel that way, but how many people care enough about safety that they actually go and figure out how many accidents cars actually get into? Like, I have never met a person who actually went to the NHTSA website to figure out like what's actually a safe car. When I talk to people about vehicle safety, most people have a bunch of demonstrably false beliefs about what constitutes a safe car. And they don't care enough about safety to disabuse themselves of these notions, which are actually getting in the way of their own safety. So I think it's rational to choose a safe vehicle, assuming that you can afford it and, it fits your requirements otherwise and that kind of stuff. But my observation is not that people overwhelmingly do that. There's definitely a subset of people who prize safety very highly. And maybe they're really important. Maybe they'll dominate the market or whatnot. But I also observed that there's a huge number of people for whom safety, it very clearly isn't. Like people buying Corvettes, safety is not one of their, and the people who buy Corvettes, they love Corvettes. It's like it got incredible brand loyalty, right? So there are definitely people where safety doesn't make the top 3 or 4 for them.
Sure.
And for a lot of the people who verbally will tell you that they really care about safety, they don't care about safety enough to actually figure out what's really safe. Instead, they, my dad said this was safe, I'll buy that. Yeah. I care about safety, so I'm going to buy what my dad said was safe, right?
Okay, so here's another angle is to that point is kind of more, I think there's this illusion where people think that if they're driving it, they add that extra safety element. Like, I mean, this is just my hypothesis, but it feels like most people think like they're the safest driver ever. You know, it's like they just think that
everybody thinks they're above average.
Exactly.
That's
the thing.
For literally everybody.
Exactly, right. And so therefore, a Corvette in the hands of an average, whatever, young person, teenager, whatever, is unsafe. But in my hands, like, it's safe, right? I don't know. It just seems like there's some type of weird rationalization going around. But when I think
self-awareness is not a characteristic human beings have. Right?
Yeah, but my hypothesis, or I posit that if you take the hands out of, the wheels of the car out of the hands of the driver, and they can't rationalize that anymore, then maybe they might see it a little bit more objective. It's going to be
very interesting to see how psychology changes when that becomes that. Because my own driving style really changed a lot when I didn't have to do the detail. It's like stop and go driving. I live in LA. I've lived in LA for a long time. For 30 years, I've been dealing with like the hellacious, all ever worsening traffic conditions, right? And I just hate it. I hated it more when I had a job and I had to be places on time, or you were late for some important thing that you were going to. Like, I never go anywhere anymore. But now that I don't have to deal with it, because there are situations. Autopilot had stop and go traffic nailed a long time ago. Like, 2 years ago, you could have fallen asleep in a car, in an autopilot and stop and go, and you would have been perfectly safe. Like, it never made mistakes in stop and go. It was so safe in that situation. So you're super relaxed if you're in stop and go traffic in an autopilot car. So it used to be that, like, my driving pleasure was, like stop and go was super, super low, and everything else, it was pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of flipped with autopilot. It's like the most relaxing place ever is stop and go traffic, right? Because you just don't have to do anything. Yeah. The car's just got it. Definitely. So I think psychology definitely changes when you can comfortably give up responsibility for having to deal with, the outside world, and you can just kind of enjoy yourself or listen to music. And, but it's going to be interesting to see how that manifests, right, in people's behavior. Because, like, I'd like to think that most people will do essentially what I did, which is just become a much more relaxed, friendlier, happier driver, But that might not be true. Yeah. It might be that it's not a boon for everybody the way it was for me.
James has just told me that he's ordered a Plaid Model S. So what's going on? I'm curious. Can you tell us what's your order? Is it like, when are you getting it? Why did you order it?
Well, I say I'm going to get it in August. I ordered the Plaid Plus. In fact, at Battery Day, I did this thing where I didn't actually get to go into Battery Day. I don't remember if you were in there or not, but we went up there to hang out with people, and we were sitting in a parking lot nearby watching it. We were sitting in our Tesla and we were watching it on an iPad or something like that. And when Elon said, "And you can order it now," like, I went to the website, like, boom, Anyway, but yeah, so the Plus isn't coming, so I switched it to Plaid, and I always buy my Teslas. They're all red with a white interior, right? So I had to wait until August to get that. So that's the plan. Nice. I like sports cars. I had sports cars before. Before I switched to driving Tesla. I had a Porsche 911 was like my daily driver, and
really? Wow.
It was fun. Yeah. But the reason I got it is because I'm a engineering geek, right? Mm-hmm. And when I drove I bought that Porsche in like 2000, right? So I had it a long time, but it was an amazing piece of engineering, and I really liked that about it. It wasn't so much the go fast and whatnot. I mean, it handled great, and there were all those kinds of things, but stuff that's really well made, I just really, really like. And that's why I want the Plaid, right? I don't know how much people have talked about this, but wrapping the carbon wrapped rotors in an electric motor is an amazing idea, and it's an incredible piece of technology, and it will make me happy knowing that there are 3 of those motors in my garage, and that's why I'm getting it. Because, for a long time, the Porsche for me, it was a garage queen. It's just a beautiful car, and it was a great piece of engineering, and I liked having it. I like having a nice piece of art on the wall, and I could drive it, and and it was fun and that kind of stuff. And the Plaid we do tons and tons of road trips, and so I really wanted to upgrade my S to get something that was quieter and a smoother ride. And I was looking forward to 500 miles of range. Like that would have been nice.
Yeah.
Not that I think, like, unlike a lot of people, I'm not at all upset that I'm not going to get a 500-mile range car. I'm totally fine with 350. My current Tesla was 335 when it was new, and I've never had a problem with it. I've been everywhere in that car, and range is just not an issue for me. But I'm super looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be fun. It has all kinds of things that, like, I don't need a PS5. I don't play video games. There's a lot of silly things about it, right? But as a piece of engineering, I'm really into that, right? It's
okay. So
there's some guy named Alex said, the rotors in that motor, when they're turning at speed, the surface is at 31,000 gravities of acceleration. Right. So, like, it's enough acceleration. Well, first of all, the rotor the reason they have to wrap carbon around that, right, is that to keep an electric motor efficient, you need to minimize the air gap between the stator and the rotor, or the two moving parts, because air has 10,000 times the magnetic field resistance that the metal has, right? So even a tiny, tiny air gap dramatically reduces the efficiency of the motor. So you machine those things and you try to get that gap as tight as you can. The problem with motors that turn really fast, like when you're really getting up there in speed, is the rotor starts to expand. And if you want to have a really high speed motor, you have to start with a much bigger gap. Because otherwise, if the rotor hits a stator, that's really bad, especially if it happens at 20,000 RPM. So Tesla's fix was, let's find the strongest material in existence, and we'll squeeze that rotor down really, really tight so it can't get bigger. Even under 30,000 gravities of load, right? It won't get bigger. And that's just crazy. It's freaking awesome. And I want one. So that's why I'm getting the Plaid.
Awesome. Okay, so help us unpack some of this stuff here. So we have these carbon wrapped rotors that basically, like, keep the motor from expanding too much, right? Is that the gist of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the motor's it has a stator on the outside that generates a field, and it has a rotor on the inside that interacts with that, right? And the two magnetic field, I mean, there are different ways to get them interacting magnetic fields: switched reluctance, permanent magnet, and so on. But you need these two fields to interact with one another, and those are what generate the torque that the motor generates, right? And mostly the fields get generated inside these very high permittivity materials like iron, right? And copper's not as good as iron, but it's also pretty good. But air is really terrible. It's really terrible. So your magnetic field path, you want as little air in that path as possible. You want it really, really, really small. And so ideally, a really good electric motor is like this precision piece of engineering that's got, like 10 microns of air gap or 100 microns of air gap. But if your rotor is going to spin really fast, you can't maintain small tolerances, because the rotor, when 20,000 RPM, that rotor is going to expand. Like, there's no material you can make it out of, no metallic, material that you can make it out of. But hey, carbon fiber, right? It's got decent permittivity, and it's crazy, crazy, crazy strong. Like, I was actually surprised. I'd never heard of carbon wrapped rotors. It seemed like just kind of a nuts idea when I heard about it. And I went researching it, and people have been looking at it for a really long time, for like train motors and really diesel engines. And
like, when you research this stuff, do you just type in Google like carbon wrapped rotors?
Yeah. I go to Google Scholar and look and see who wrote a paper on it, right?
Interesting. How about, like, they're showing this graph about the whole power curve where, previous motors, they would like kind of drop off, but with their new Plaid, motor just kind of keeps maximum power, like continually. Like, what do you make of that? Like, what kind of changes did they do to make that happen?
Well, they're battery limited, right? So that's why you get the, so when the motor, at low speeds, you're torque limited. So there are two parts to that curve. There's this part and there's the flat part, right? And so this part is where you're torque limited. You can only generate so much torque. And so what happens is your power goes up smoothly as the rotational velocity of the motor increases, right? And then you hit the power limit. Well, what's the power limit of the motor? It might be how hot can the motor get? Or it might be, how much, at what point do the magnets saturate, and suddenly the efficiency goes way down. I think in Tesla's case, they're just battery limited, right? Like I guess some engineer said that the motors put out the equivalent of like 400 horsepower a piece, and there's 3 of them. So normally you would expect the car to have 1,200 horsepower, except it doesn't get to 1,200 horsepower because the battery can only supply like about 1,000 plus horsepower worth of power, right? So 1,000 is what you get to. So probably it just keeps going up until it hits the limit of what the battery can safely output, and then it's flat. And why is it flat? It's flat because the battery is the limiter, not the motor. Like in the other cars, the motor is the limiter. Like, on the previous P85, the reason you would see that power curve start to fall off is because the efficiency of the motor would start to fall off as it got faster.
And
it could be the electronics of the motor controller, or it could be field saturation. It could be various kinds of things, right? But in the case of the Plaid motor, the motors, it's just overwhelmingly capable, and the battery's the limiter. So you just go up till you hit the battery limit, and then it's flat because the battery limit just stays the same no matter how fast the motor goes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, fascinating stuff. It's like, it's like I just think about 2 seconds. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't even fathom that.
It is.
It's just like crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure it's gonna be. I don't know. I mean, Emmett took his car to the drag strip, and I'm like, God, would that be fun? Like, I don't even know. Maybe that would be fun to do. I've never taken a car to a racetrack, so I don't know. Like, I have friends who like got really into racing cars, and they had a little team, and they would go to they would take their cars out and go racing and that kind of stuff. And then just, I don't know, it seems like a lot of time investment.
Yeah.
And I have all these neural networks to analyze.
All right, James. Thanks for sharing us the update on that. Thanks for chatting about this idea of just, the overall fleet, the advantages and disadvantages, or whatever that plays, not just for Tesla, but for other car companies. We'll go ahead and continue our marathon chat. You can check it out in our next episode. It'll be episode number 5. We'll be talking about auto labeling. All right. See you guys next.